Okay, I have 11:30, so we'll go ahead and get started just in the interest of staying on time. So, welcome to our third Best Practices Summit virtual session for Family Services Coordinator roles. So excited to have you all. And of course, I know just from looking at the names, we have people from all kinds of different roles that are joining us. And I hope it's because you're really excited to hear Lacey Alonso here in just a moment, because Lacey is one of my favorite people in the OPO world. I've just always had a lot of respect for her and just the passion she has for donor families. And we were just realizing that we have even more in common than I even knew, just talking about some things prior to this. So it'll be a great conversation. But if you don't know me for some reason, my name is Sean Jordan. I'm the president of the Research and Planning Group. We are a research firm in St. Louis that does opinion research. And I've been working with OPOs since I started here as an intern for about 16 years now. I love what you do. I admire you all so much. And we'll talk a little bit before we go into our breakouts here about just how much and how deep that goes for us. It really matters a lot to us what you all do every day. Really excited to have you all. I want to mention that we keep everybody muted just in the interest of keeping things moving. So if you have any questions that come up during our Q&A in just a moment, I'd like you to put them in the chat and then we will read them out loud. I also want to introduce our team that's here. So we have Holly, Lane, and Trish that are all from Team RPG. And then we have Jenny, who is our OPO liaison and helps us out with a lot of OPO stuff because she came from the OPO world herself. And Jenny, you want to say anything?
Hi, glad to be here today. I consult with RPG because I had spent a decade in the OPO industry here in Ohio and had an early time and then returned and definitely have witnessed the changes. So glad to be here and thanks for doing this and being part of gaining knowledge, improving your practice, and making your OPO better to serve your hospitals and your donors and their families. So let's get with it today. Thanks.
All right. Well, we're going to move right on to our speaker for today, and it's going to be more of a Q&A today, but we have Lacey Alonso, who is from Midwest Transplant Network, and Lacey has done a lot of things in her role at MTN, and currently she is working on the aftercare side of donor family services, working with donor families, planning events, all kinds of incredible things you'll hear about in just a moment. But one of the reasons I invited her is because in talking with a lot of the family services folks, I've realized that one of the areas where things kind of have a lot of opportunity right now is in understanding what goes on both sides of the donor family experience. And so I decided to change things up a little bit and have someone who's a little bit more on the aftercare side come and talk about that role to the family services side. And then when we talk to the aftercare folks next month, we're going to bring in someone from the family services side to talk to them. And the reason for that is just to help each other to understand what is happening in this donor family experience. How can we make sure the donor families are really being cared for as best as possible? And then that handoff is so important. And I can tell you guys from the survey data that we collect, one of the areas where it is really tricky for donor families, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, is when they're leaving the hospital. They're starting to think about the funeral. They're starting to think about life after their loved one. They're starting to think about those things and they're getting assaulted with all kinds of information that they have to retain and try to remember at a time where it's really, really hard to retain and remember information. So the handoff is so important because once aftercare takes over and begins offering them grief support and counseling and mementos and other things that you guys all do for the donor families, a lot of times they are kind of unclear about what's going to happen next, and they're unclear as well about are they going to get to hear from the recipients. And this is even more true on the tissue side of things sometimes than it is on the organ side of things, because on the tissue donor side of things, they sometimes are retaining even less information because the donation experience is a little bit different for them. So we're going to talk about all of that, and I'm really excited to take some time to cover some of these topics. And Lacey, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Lacey, why don't you just before we get into the questions we have, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your role at MTN and what you do?
So, I am a donor family services coordinator, also known as aftercare, and it is my privilege to work with every one of our donor families after our family services team and our donation services team have gotten authorization and cared for them either in the hospital for organ donation or over the phone for tissue donation. So we, like you mentioned, we do a lot of events for families. We have about 12 to 15 events per year. Last year, we had nearly 3,000 donor families that attended our events. So we stay pretty active with our aftercare events and the services that we give to families afterwards to help them stay connected and find community in other donor families.
Fantastic. Well, didn't you guys just hold an event fairly recently? I think when we had talked about.
We did. We recently had our two fun summer events. One is the Kansas City Zoo Donor Family Evening, and one is at in one of our satellite areas in Wichita at a place called Tanganyika Wildlife Park. And we had over 1,600 people. Nope, I'm lying to you, 1,200 people at those two events.
Still a really impressive number.
It was a lot, and it's fantastic. It's so nice. We see the amount of support that we're providing to families, and I love that. But what I think is so special about these events is that we see donor families supporting each other. So we rent these parks out for private events. That's how we do it here. So everybody there is a part of the MTN donation family. And it is so nice when you see families that are new to these events coming in, and you can say, they're not sure what to expect, or, it's all new to them. And seeing other donor families just come in and swoop them up and take them under their wing. It's so nice having that peer support that, that's something we could never duplicate. And I love, that's probably my favorite part about our events, is seeing how much these families care for each other too.
That's wonderful. And I think that's something that gets lost sometimes in the initial stages of the donor process is just the people in the hospital see them on the worst days of their life. But after they go through this experience, and even on the tissue donor side, which we're going to talk about in a moment, this is so meaningful to them, and it gives them such a legacy that they can hold on to and that they can find community with. So appreciative for you guys for all that you're doing for your DSA. And I know in our conversation, you've shared that you yourself came from a donor family. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that experience, along with your just some of the other things that you've done at MTN while you've been there prior to the role you're in now?
Yeah, so I just want to first start by saying my donor hero is my little brother, Josh. And we lost him in 2014 after a battle to mental health. And when I tell you that donation means the absolute world to our family, it does. It gave us an opportunity to change the end of his story from something incredibly tragic to a story of hope. And I can't even begin to quantify how special and important that has been to our family. So I started here with MTN in 2017 after a very long career with Kansas City, Missouri Fire Department. I worked at one of the busiest stations in the city we'd run 26, 27 calls in a 24-hour shift. And if you're not good at math, that is more than one call an hour. So we stayed busy, and I loved every minute of it until I didn't anymore. And I realized I needed to make a change. So I was at home feeling sorry for myself one night and going through some keepsake mementos, and came across the letter that we got from MTN with the outcome of my brother's donation. And to kind of recall back to what you said, families forget about the things that we tell them in hospitals. I had completely forgotten that we had got that letter. And so when I found that letter and, read it again and remembered, oh my gosh, yeah, this happened. Hey, I wonder if they have any use for busted up, burned out paramedics. And surprisingly, they did. And so I started here in our donation services department in 2017, doing tissue requesting over the phone. Worked in that role for about a year, and then transitioned to our organ procurement side and worked a clinical role there for about 4 years. And then when one of our aftercare staff retired in 2022, I knew that this was where I wanted to be, and the rest is history.
That's fantastic. So you've really gotten to see the experience from many different sides, the clinical side, from the requesting side, from being a donor family member yourself. That's just that gives you so much to draw from, I think, when you're interacting with the donor families. And I absolutely have to ask you, because you've been in the shoes of a donor family member before, being one yourself. How does it feel when you're going through that process? And what are some of the things that you empathize with when you're connecting with donor families today?
You know, the thing I remember the most about the night that my brother died and became a donor, there are three things that I will never forget for the rest of my life. One is just how uncompassionate and unkind the police officers were that were at his scene when I showed up to be there with my brother when we found him. The next thing I will remember is how kind and compassionate the person from MTN was. At that time, I had no idea who this woman was. She was just a random person calling me on the phone, but I had no idea that she was going to become one of my favorite colleagues and humans in the entire world. And the third thing that I will remember from that night is how unkind I was to her. When she called us about donation, I went into protective mama bear mode. My mom was coming in town from 4 hours away, literally experiencing the worst night of her life. And this woman was calling me on the phone and asking me all these questions and wanting to do donation. And I did not understand why she needed to talk to my mom. You know, my mom was legal next to kin. My brother wasn't married. So I wanted to be that protective person. And I was not kind to Jeanette when she called us. And finally, she said, Lacey, you have expressed how much donation means to you and how much you want this to happen. And I just have to tell you, I can't. This is not going to happen if I don't get to talk to your mom. I am so sorry that you're going to have to wake her up. I know this has been a horrible night. This is something so important to you. I can't make this happen without her. And I have taken that experience every day moving forward in my career as a reminder that these people are literally going through the worst day of their life. I wasn't kind. It wasn't sunshine and roses. And look at how fulfilling and incredible it's been for me. You know, what we get stuck in, you know, we do this 100 times a day, but we forget that it is their first time going through it. So the biggest thing that I've remembered from that is compassion and kindness and being patient. You know, without that, my brother wouldn't have been a donor. If she had just decided that, okay, well, I'm not going to take the verbal abuse of this girl, and I am horrified for that every day of my life since then. But, you know, if she had not been willing to reframe things and reshape it in a way that I was able to take, this wouldn't have happened. So I try to take that into me with every interaction with our families.
And I just think it's tremendous that, and I know it speaks to her as a person, but that she was able to hear how important donation was to you, even if you were being unkind and even if you were saying no. And she was able to find a way to work with you to really make that happen in a way that meant something to you, because it's so easy, as you said, to just be turned off by that negative attitude that is coming up. And wow, I'm so impressed that she was able to do that. I know I know you are too, but it just really strikes me that that is something that requires an awful lot of empathy for not only the person going through the experience, but also the wish of the donor to do something, or the wish of the family to have the donor, you know, do something to help others. So that's fantastic. Well, it's really interesting. You've had some clinical experience before moving into your current role. So tell us a little bit about the experiences you had when you were in a more clinical role versus the sorts of interactions that you have today.
Sure. So, being in the clinical role, a lot of what I was focused on during the donor management side of things was, you know, stabilizing organ function. So, maintaining that blood pressure, making sure that organs were optimized. We're spending a lot of time on allocation. During that time, I don't have a lot of time to talk with the families, especially if a family or, you know, if a patient was very unstable and we were doing a lot of interventions. So, as much as I wanted to be kind and compassionate and spend as much time learning about their loved one as I could, that I didn't have the time to prioritize on that. One of the things that I loved the most when the clinical side was when we would have DCDs and we'd be in there extubating and we'd have a family at the bedside and they're telling stories about their loved ones and I'm getting to hear them play the music and we're saying prayers and they're telling me, you know, about the time that Jimmy's dog ran away with the socks across the street. And I began to realize that as much as I loved the clinical side of things, the whole reason that I liked DCDs was because I got to stand there and talk to the families during that time and hear their stories. And so now I get to focus on that. And it is the coolest job I've ever had. It's the most worthwhile job I've ever had. I can't even imagine doing anything else ever again.
That's so interesting because I don't think I've ever heard a clinical person at an OPO talk about the DCD cases as being a time to connect with the families, and yet that happens all the time, and that's so fascinating. Well, now that you're supporting donor families in aftercare, I know one of the things you're really great at doing is helping the donor families to find some sense and purpose in their grief journey and to transition into a life without their loved one. So tell me a little bit about how you think about the care and support you provide to these donor families and what you're really ultimately hoping to provide them.
What I really ultimately hope to provide them is just a clear journey of what comes next. Our family services teams and our donation services teams do a fantastic job of explaining to them what's going to happen in the moment. Giving them that informed disclosure while they're there, telling them this is what you can expect from us right now. And for me, it is very important to continue the efforts of their work after the fact and really give these families a chance to know what comes next. Um, as we have been working on some things, our team realized that was an area that we were lacking on a little bit. So we've been putting some projects in place and working on that. And, probably the biggest question that we get in aftercare is just a statement is, I never heard anything from you guys after donation. And I always kind of thought, what do you mean? Did you not remember getting a letter? Oh, wait, I didn't remember getting a letter. So putting myself back in those shoes, we think about science and, the things that people are going through in a grief state, they don't have the optimal situations to be turning things into long-term memories. So you say something to them at the hospital or you tell them they're getting this letter and then they completely forget because of chemistry. And so it really is our job to focus on that and really set good expectations for how they are going to interact with us moving forward and what they can expect from us.
In terms of kind of your philosophy of how to engage with a donor family, like what advice would you give anyone who's interacting with the donor families in the hospital? Like, what do they need to really have at the core of that interaction and that discussion? What kind of experience do they need to provide? Tell me a little bit about that.
Gosh, so I would say bring your aftercare folks in early if you can. We are only as good as the information that you guys get for us. And, we want to do better. We know that you guys are working hard to get that yes. And our job is to get the yes and after that. And I say the yes and because I want them to say, well, John was a donor in 2017. And because of the fact that they took such great care of me during this, Jimmy's going to be a donor today. So really, because of the work that you do, the groundwork that you put in place for us, if there's nicknames that they go by or special things that really are important for us to know, boy, tell us. We really want to know those things because we don't have those fantastic connections just starting out like you guys do.
Well, because a lot of the folks in our audience today are mostly in family services roles, I wanted to ask, what do you feel that those interacting with the families in the hospitals can do to best prepare donor families for the handoff to aftercare? So, what kind of questions can they answer? What resources can they provide? What sort of guidance can they give?
So, we always kind of joke that we're death by brochuring people, but sometimes it's not a bad thing. So if your organization has a brochure about, what is going to happen in the aftercare process or who to contact after that, that's a great thing to have. People are not going to remember it in the moment. If you tell them you can talk to my colleague Lacey Alonzo, here's her phone number, they're not going to remember that in the moment. But if they have something tangible to look at, one of the things that we have here that I think is a fantastic, we have a bereavement guide that really has some great information. It has funeral home information. It has medical examiner information about applying for Social Security, and it has an information about aftercare and how to contact us and things like that. So having something that is an all-encompassing guide is so helpful.
Well, I know aftercare is ever changing, and you're always thinking about how you can work with family services to improve the support you're all providing the donor family during that really challenging, shocking, difficult time that they're going through. So how would you say aftercare is changing, and what can family services do to help make the aftercare team the best they can be in supporting donor families?
You are correct that aftercare is ever changing. We actually just implemented a really awesome new program that is allowing for correspondence to go through our website. It seems kind of silly to think that we hadn't been doing it before, but it had never been feasible for us. So now donor families can write a letter to their recipient through their, their loved ones' recipients through our website. And I really think just understanding what your aftercare teams do is so valuable. If I were to ask the family services coordinators on this call, what does your aftercare team do? And you answered to me that they write the letters. You don't understand your aftercare team and you don't understand how they can be helping you. Yes, most of our aftercare teams write letters, but that is not all we do. We take the phone calls of the mom that just really wants to know how her loved one's heart is doing. We deliver the bad news that, hey, we recovered tissue, but unfortunately it wasn't able to be used. There's so much more going on, and we kind of silo. We all get in these stacks and thinking that we're the only ones or the best ones to take care of these families. It's a little paternalistic, and we're all guilty of it because we care so deeply for people, and just really understanding that you don't have to do this alone. We want to, and we want to help you because at the end of the day, we all have the same goal.
Well, Lacey, it's been so great to do this Q&A with you, and I wanted to open things up to questions from our audience while we have a few minutes. While we're waiting, and guys, if you want to have any of those, please put them in the chat and we will read them out loud. And if you want to identify who you are too, sometimes it doesn't always show up on Zoom real well. We'd love to know. But Lacey, I know one of the things that really came to mind for me after what you were saying there is that in OPOs, it's really easy to get focused on your task or your process or your department. And that can be really easy to do as well for the people that are working with you guys in the hospitals, with the social workers that might work with you, or the chaplains, or some of the other folks. How do you break those silos down? How do you get everybody to be on the same page so that they can feel like they're all working towards the same goal?
That is a great question. One of the things that I think is really helpful is shadowing with each other. You have no idea what somebody is going through unless you have spent a little bit of time with them. And really, like, I'm so grateful to have that experience of working in the hospital alongside of our family services coordinators, that I don't get frustrated when I realize, hey, there's only a first name in here. I know that they were busy. Also, expanding that grace and understanding that, we are only as good as what each other does. So really, job shadowing with each other, spending even a few hours, is so helpful.
That's fantastic advice. And as a researcher, that's the kind of thing that I love to hear, because we love to learn from people while they're doing things. So, well, we have a few questions in the chat. One of them was, one OPO person asked if you could share the brochure you mentioned. Is that something that you're able to share? I could send that out to everyone after the.
I don't see why not. Let me just
Okay.
double check
Okay.
with my boss. I don't see why I would not be able to. So I would be happy to.
Fantastic. My next question is, it says, hi, this is Royal from DFCO from Donor Alliance Denver. Lacey, if there's one thing about DFCOs need to remember about aftercare, so I'm presuming, what one thing do people in the donor family services roles need to understand about aftercare?
Ooh, it's a good one. I don't know if I can come up with one.
You can pick three if you want. That's fine.
I would say just give people grace. Our donor families, when we think about them, this is common knowledge to us. Everything that we're working with, this is common knowledge to us. It seems so mundane to repeat these things, but again, it is the first time for them. And you may have told them 5 other times, but for whatever reason, they were not able to manage it. We also think about like a health literacy point of things. not everybody that we're working with is incredibly highly educated like most of us are. So even though it makes sense to us the way that we're explaining it, we need to figure out other ways of explaining things to make it so that it's digestible to them. So if at first you try and it doesn't work, or you get the blank stares that are like, man, I'm not sure if they're getting this, really try to see if you can circle back and make it click for them.
And I'm certain you guys have to do that in aftercare, right? When people are coming in asking you questions, you have to answer the questions about what they missed in the hospital.
Oh, 100%. 100%. We will have families that call and say, oh, I was told I was going to get to be on a stained glass window in your OPO. And we're like, how did you get that? We don't have any stained glass windows here. I'm not sure. And long story short, it was something at the hospital. So for the donor families, there is not a clear designation between the hospital and the OPO. They think we're all the same person. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of digging. And if they have expectations that, of something like that, you might have to reach out to the hospital because it's probably something they're offering and not us.
Well, here's another question. This comes from Hannah at Live on Nebraska. How do you feel that there is a most appropriate part of the process to start introducing aftercare? How do you handle all other family members reaching out to like our aftercare who are not part of the OPO?
So we do a pretty good job of, redirecting and say, I appreciate you reaching out. Unfortunately, you're not somebody that's listed. I can share that information with. You're going to have to reach back out to the family, obviously, like everybody does. But as far as like an appropriate time to introduce aftercare to your team, I think the earlier the better is, because our family services coordinators, when they're on call, they're handling these things with the family, but they're on to the next call or the next case as soon as they can and don't necessarily have all that time. I would love it if they could say, hey, my colleague Lacey is going to be reaching out to you in a week. We've been talking about stealing an idea from, I think it was Indiana, because I just think they have the most incredible aftercare program. They do phone calls a week after. Now their team's significantly larger than ours, so that's something that's not completely feasible for us just yet, but we've been taking some cues for them. I know Chicago, they are now starting to have their aftercare coordinators going in and doing support in the hospitals. I think that's fantastic. Anything that we can do to try to make that handoff as seamless as possible so the family doesn't feel that,
Definitely, definitely. Well, I have two more questions. How do you get feedback from your donor families about your aftercare process?
So that's a great question. We send surveys. So we do surveys. We send one at 6 months, like most people probably also do. That is really focusing on the person that did the approaching. So the donation service coordinator, the family service coordinator, and then at 2 years we also send a survey that is directed towards our aftercare. We ask if they attended any of our events. Do they have any suggestions? Are they part of our private Facebook group? Would they like to? Have they found any value from that? And then somebody from our aftercare team is very involved in our private donor family Facebook group, and we're chatting with families in there all the time. If we're considering changing our zoo events next year from our zoo days and doing a baseball game. And so we're probably going to put a little poll in our donor family Facebook group and say, hey, what do you think about this? And if the feedback is like, absolutely not, don't change things, that's stuff we want to know.
And then someone else asked, do donor families who are opposed to donation but whose loved one was registered seek out aftercare?
That is a great, great question. I am so glad you asked that. Yes, they do. 100% they do. So that is something that we're actually starting to track, is what is happening with these families that are FPA opposed, and are they moving forward after that? And we are finding out that yes, they are, because we think about it, they're not necessarily opposed to donation. They're opposed to the fact that their loved one is dying. And maybe they are opposed to donation, But we think about grief and we think about, that's the one thing that they can really have a handle on at that point in time. It's the one thing where they can put their foot down and say, I control this in a situation where they are very out of control. It has been our experience to find out that we do have some families that are involved after donation and after resistance, and they come back and are very involved in our aftercare programs.
That's interesting. I never thought about that, but it completely makes sense. And I think what you said there, that the control that they have, they're opposed to their loved one dying. And I know we've talked about that in some of our previous sessions as well. That's really at the root of a lot of what they're feeling at the time. And I think that's so insightful what you just said. So
Well, I
thank you.
experienced it personally.
Yeah.
I was there. I was that person. I was the one who was saying, absolutely not. You're not going to talk to my mom, because that was the one thing that I had control over in that time period. And so I know for a fact it happens. So we have to be cognizant of the fact that it's just biological. It's just part of the science of grief.
It's so true. And it's so easy to say no when what you're really saying is, hold on, I'm not ready to do this, or hold on, I need to
Exactly.
think. And I think no sounds a lot more definitive sometimes than it really is. And even in the case of someone, they're posed in the hospital, but then they're seeking out aftercare, they're still positive about donation. It just wasn't the timing, or the situation just didn't work out for them in that particular situation. So anyway, well, this has been so wonderful, and I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your sharing all of your thoughts today, and of course, we are so grateful to you for all of the wonderful work you do, and for being, representative of your brother, which is
Thank you.
fantastic, and his heroism in being a donor. So I'm
Thanks.
going to transition here just a moment to get us ready for our breakouts. But guys, I will put Lacey's contact information in the follow-up email that I send out. And Lacey, if we're able to share that brochure, I can include that in there as well. And certainly, please feel free to reach out to her, because she is a wealth of knowledge, as you can hear, and also just passionate about what she's doing. And we so appreciate her. So thank you again, Lacey.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm gonna put our breakout questions in the chat here just so we have those. But let me share my screen here just briefly. And what we're going to do is we're going to transition into our breakouts now. I know a lot of people drop off at the breakout time, and that's fine if you need to, but let me encourage you to stick around and chat with your OPO colleagues, because you will learn so much from them. And Lacey and I were talking right before the session started about how important it is just to be able to hear from one another. I am a big fan. I was not a part of it, but I'm a big fan of the collaborative that went on many, many years ago in the OPO world, that just brought so many practices in common and helped folks to really kind of share what they were doing across the country. And I love to keep that spirit alive. I know Jenny Oliver was a part of that, and she loves to keep that spirit alive as well. But another thing that's going on right now that's really rough is you guys are hearing some of the worst national news that you could possibly hear about your industry right now. And it breaks my heart. I know it breaks Jenny's heart. It breaks all of our hearts when we hear some of the stories that we're hearing. But I want you to know, we here at RPG, we have been a longtime ally of OPOs. We believe in organ procurement. We believe in transplantation. We believe in what you do every single day. And I just want you to know, we stand together with you and for you. We are always here to be on your side. And as you serve donors and their families to save lives, that mission, it means something. And I'll tell you guys, I turn away work sometimes from organizations that I don't want to work with, that I feel are unethical or not right. I've never turned away work with an OPO, because I believe so much in what you do. And it kills me. My own mother has told me that she's taken her name off the registry recently because she's hearing misinformation. And I said, you can come and talk to me. I know a lot about this stuff, even though I don't work for an OPO. And even so, the misinformation that she's hearing is making her hesitate. And it hurts me when I have family members say that. I'm hurt. I know it hurts us all when we hear that, but it's because there's a lot going on right now, and what you guys are doing by serving donor families, taking care of them, helps to turn that around. So please continue to do the good work you're doing, and just know that we're behind you. One way that we are also behind you right now is I started a Substack newsletter a few weeks ago, and there's a QR code here for it. I'd love for you to sign up and check it out, or just even go ahead and check it out on your own and see if you think there's anything useful there. I've got another article that will be going live today. I try to put out one a week. But these are deep dives into topics that we're hearing about in the research that we do, and also in a lot of the things that I have read or that I'm aware of in terms of other books and resources and papers and things like that. So I think what you'll find is that there's a lot there to chew on and a lot to absorb. And of course, I'd love to hear from you about how it's personally useful to you, and also if there's any topics you'd love me to cover, because we think a lot about what you're doing, and we try to bring some of the expertise we have from other aspects of the business world and the healthcare world in sharing some of those thoughts. So please check OPO Insights out and tell us how we can make it more useful to you. Here are our questions for today for the breakouts. I want you to introduce yourselves just briefly, and then think about how OPO staff can create more meaningful experiences for donor families. Now, you can talk about things you're already doing. That'd be great. We'd love to hear that. But if you have other ideas as well about things that you could be doing that you're not doing, please share those as well. And then when a donor family is frustrated with an OPO's approach, how can trust and relationships be rebuilt following that frustration? Well, Lacey talked about her own situation where it was just taking persistent empathy, to really get her to a point where she could agree to do the thing that she needed to do, which is to put her mother on the phone so that her brother could be a donor. And obviously, you can see how that affected her and changed her life in a positive way. So it's really an important question to ask, because it's so easy to just go, well, they don't want to do this, let's just move on. But obviously, you guys are on a mission to make sure that's not happening. So I'd love to hear you talk about that as well. We'll have members of our team scattered throughout the breakout rooms, and I'm going to go ahead and open those up right now. But thank you for joining us, and we will come back to this room at the end just to close up. So bear with me for just a second while I get the breakout room set up, and enjoy your talk. All right, here we go.